Have you ever heard of someone who lost everything, only to inherit something so powerful it could change not just their life, but the future of an entire coastline? Statistics show that over 3.5 million Americans experience homelessness each year, but almost none of them wake up one morning to discover they've become the guardian of a place the world has been trying and failing to understand for decades. And yet, that is exactly what happened to Elena Carter, a woman who had already survived more tragedy than most people face in a lifetime. What if the universe doesn't always give second chances, but sometimes, just sometimes, it gives something even bigger, something wild, breathtaking, and unbelievably fragile? Today, we're stepping into a story that feels almost impossible. A story about loss, legacy, and the kind of unexpected inheritance that forces us to question what wealth truly means. Let's begin this journey together. Before Elena Carter ever heard the name of the island that would one day redefine her destiny, she was living a version of life that so many Americans silently endure but rarely speak about. Her story didn't begin with mystery, inheritance, or miracles. It began with exhaustion, the kind so deep it settles into your bones and convinces you that tomorrow won't look any different than today. On a rainy Thursday morning in late November, Elena stood outside a rundown motel just off Highway 67, clutching a plastic bag of her daughter Ava's clothes because the zipper on their only suitcase had broken months earlier. The motel manager had slipped a notice under her door at dawn. Final day, vacate by 3 p.m. It wasn't an eviction, not officially, but that doesn't matter when you have nowhere to go. And like nearly 40% of single mothers in the U.S. who live paycheck to paycheck, Elena was already too familiar with this cycle of temporary roofs and constant fear. Just a year earlier, she had been a full-time nursing assistant, working double shifts at a community hospital. But then came the accident, the kind that takes 1 second to happen and a lifetime to recover from. A drunk driver ran a red light, destroying Elena's car and crushing her left leg so severely she couldn't stand for more than 20 minutes at a time. She lost her job. Then the medical bills piled in, each envelope stamped urgent. And then came the divorce paperwork from a man who claimed he couldn't handle the pressure. By the time summer arrived, Elena and 9-year-old Ava were living in their car, parking behind grocery stores and gas stations, doing homework under streetlights when the battery died. It's the part of the American story people don't like to see. Nearly 1 in 5 homeless families are single mothers with young children doing everything right and still falling through the cracks. But the breaking point didn't come from poverty or pain. It came from watching Ava pretend she wasn't hungry, so Elena could finish the last pack of instant noodles. It came from overhearing her daughter whisper to a teacher, "We just move a lot, but we're fine." It came from the moment Elena realized she had started to believe that this motel room, this fear, this constant running, was what life would always be. And yet, despite everything, she still held on to small rituals that kept her sane. Brushing Ava's hair every morning, keeping a notebook full of quotes she never showed anyone, and whispering to herself, "Just one more day. You can make it. One more day." The lesson hidden inside her struggle isn't about despair. It's about the quiet, stubborn resilience that grows in the darkest soil. It's about understanding how many people around us are fighting battles we never see. Elena's breaking point wasn't a moment of collapse. It was the moment she realized she couldn't keep going the same way. that realization, painful as it was, created space for something unexpected. Because sometimes, before life gives you a miracle, it strips everything else away. As Elena packed their meager belongings into a torn backpack, she didn't know that a stranger was already on his way to find her. She didn't know that a single knock on a cheap motel door would unravel secrets buried for generations. And she certainly didn't know that the very moment she felt her life falling apart was the moment it was about to change forever. The snow started falling earlier than expected, a thick, heavy kind of snow that swallowed sound and turned the motel parking lot into a blur of white. Elena had seen storms before, but this one felt personal, like the sky itself was warning her that the day would not go the way she planned. She zipped Ava into her worn winter coat, the one they'd found at a donation bin outside a church, and tried to think of a place to go next. But before she could gather their things, a knock rattled the thin motel door. Not a timid knock, not the impatient pounding of the manager, but something deliberate. 3 steady taps, the kind that makes your heart jump before your mind catches up. When she opened the door, a crack, wind slammed icy flakes onto the carpet. Standing in the doorway was a man in a dark wool coat dusted with snow, holding a leather briefcase. His glasses were fogged, his cheeks flushed, but he spoke with a calmness that cut through the storm. "Miss Elena Carter?" he asked, raising his voice over the howl of the wind. "My name is Raymond Hale. I'm an attorney. I believe I'm here on behalf of someone connected to you." It made no sense. Attorneys didn't track people down in blizzards, not in small towns like this, and definitely not people living in motels with broken heaters and overdue bills. Elena tried closing the door, assuming he had the wrong room, but he held up a folder with her name printed neatly across the top. Her full name, the one she hadn't used since her wedding day. Something tightened in her chest. She let him into the room. Inside, the motel lights flickered as Raymond brushed snow from his coat. He noticed Ava immediately, a small form on the bed, hugging a stuffed dolphin, missing an eye. "I'm sorry to interrupt your evening," he said gently, "but I came a long way, and the weather won't allow me to try again tomorrow." He opened the folder, revealing old photographs, documents, clipped newspaper articles, pieces of a life Elena had never known. And then he delivered the sentence that would split her world into before and after. "You've been named the sole inheritor of the estate belonging to Ms. Eleanor Whitmore, your great-aunt." The name meant nothing to her. Eleanor Whitmore might as well have been the name of a distant star. Elena's mother had never spoken of extended family. No stories, no memories, no holiday postcards, nothing. But the attorney's voice was steady, as if he had spoken these words hundreds of times before. He placed an envelope in her trembling hands. Inside was a handwritten note from a woman she had never met, yet who seemed to know her intimately. "When the storm reaches its worst, someone must find you. That will be the beginning." Ava leaned against Elena's side, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, what does that mean?" Elena didn't know. But the weight of the envelope, the way Raymond spoke, the strange timing, it all carried a gravity she couldn't ignore. And then Raymond revealed the part that made her breath catch. The inheritance wasn't money. It wasn't jewelry or land in the usual sense. It was a remote private island off the coast of Maine, untouched protected, and deeply entangled in secrets older than Elena's family tree. For a moment, time paused. The idea felt ridiculous. They were barely surviving day to day. They had $47 left, a car that barely started in cold weather, and coats that weren't enough for the season. Yet here was a stranger offering something unreal, something that sounded like hope dressed in mystery. And sometimes the most fragile souls are the ones who need unbelievable possibilities the most. That's where the lesson lives in this moment, hidden beneath fear and disbelief. Life doesn't always reveal opportunity softly. Sometimes it arrives as a knock during a blizzard, wrapped in confusion and coated in risk. Sometimes the turning point looks like a stranger with snow in his hair, telling you your life is bigger than the pain you've carried. As the storm intensified outside, Raymond explained that others might come looking for the inheritance, people who believed they deserved it, people with resources Elena didn't have. The urgency was real. "You don't have to decide tonight," he said, "but the window to accept the estate is small, and there are forces already moving behind the scenes." Elena felt the familiar fear rising, the same fear she'd felt in hospital rooms, in courtrooms, in parking lots, where she'd slept with one eye open. But then she looked at Ava, who was watching her not with fear, but with something like hope. And for the first time in a long time, Elena wondered if maybe she wasn't meant to be trapped in survival forever. Raymond handed her keys, old, heavy, and cold to the touch. "These unlock the house, and the lighthouse," he added, almost reluctantly, as if that detail carried more meaning than he could explain. "Tomorrow, if you choose, I'll take you there." The storm outside roared, but something inside Elena stirred as well, something small but powerful, like a spark warming frozen ground. She didn't know it yet, but this was the moment her story stopped breaking and started unfolding. By sunrise, the blizzard had quieted to a cold stillness, the kind of silence that hangs in the air after nature has finished screaming. The motel parking lot was buried in snow, and Elena's car was nothing more than a white mound with a crooked antenna poking out like a frozen twig. Yet somehow she felt calmer than she had in months. Maybe it was the letter that still burned warm in her pocket. Maybe it was Ava, who woke up humming for the first time in what felt like years. Or maybe it was the quiet presence of Raymond Hale, the attorney who had returned at dawn with 2 cups of hot chocolate, a map, and an old pickup truck he promised could climb a mountain if it had to. The 3 of them set out while the sky was still tinted lavender. The roads were slick, visibility low, and the world looked like an unfinished painting. Gray strokes of trees, white smears of snowdrifts, and the occasional flash of sunlight glinting off ice. As they drove north toward the Maine coast, Raymond explained more about the inheritance. "Astor Island," he said, tracing a finger across the map, "just under 2 miles wide, uninhabited except for one caretaker and whatever Eleanor was protecting." His tone suggested that whatever was not something he could define neatly in a sentence. The drive took hours, winding through small towns where wooden houses were painted in pastel colors to fight off the gloom of winter. In one coastal town, they stopped at a diner where the owner slipped Ava an extra pancake because you look like you haven't been spoiled in a while. That simple kindness made Elena's throat tighten. She realized how starved they had been, not just for stability, but for gentleness. People underestimate how much a small act of compassion can shift a day or even a future. Those small mercies are often the handholds that keep us from falling. By midday, they reach the harbor at Winter's Cove, a quiet place where fishing boats bobbed on steel gray water. A single vessel waited at the far end of the dock, a sturdy green boat with peeling paint and the name Marlowe carved into the bow. Beside it stood a man in a thick wool jacket, white beard, eyes sharp as salt water. "You must be Elena," he said, his voice half greeting, half evaluation. "Name's Jonah Marlowe, last caretaker of Astor, or maybe second to last, depending on what you choose." Ava gripped Elena's hand tightly as they stepped onto the boat. The wind stung, the boards creaked, and the engine rumbled awake like an old dog stretching from sleep. As they pulled away from the dock, Jonah handed Ava a life jacket and pointed toward the open water. "Astor's about 40 minutes offshore, closer if the tide's kind." Ava asked endless questions: how deep the water was, whether seals really lived on the rocks, whether the lighthouse still worked. Jonah answered every one with an unexpected tenderness, explaining that he'd spent nearly 20 years watching the island breathe through storms and summers and everything in between. But as they traveled farther from land, the water changed. The deeper they went, the darker it became, a slate blue that felt almost ancient. Jonah's tone shifted too. "You're a great aunt. She believed the island chose who it revealed itself to," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Astor isn't just land. It's history, memory. Some people only see trees and rocks. Some see more." Elena didn't know which category she or Ava would fall into, but she felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. Halfway through the journey, Raymond opened Eleanor's letter again, reading a line that had stuck with him overnight. "The island will know you by your footsteps." Ava giggled, saying she hoped the island wasn't ticklish, but Elena felt a shiver, not of fear, but of familiarity, as if somewhere deep inside she already understood what Eleanor meant. Trauma has a way of dulling intuition, but hope, no matter how small, can revive it. When Astor Island finally appeared in the distance, it didn't look like the fantasy landscapes you see on postcards. It rose from the water with a kind of rugged honesty, dark evergreens lining the cliffs, a stretch of beach made of pale stone, and a lighthouse perched at the farthest point like a watchful eye. The sky above it cracked open with a ray of sunlight, illuminating the island in a way that made Jonah mutter, "Well now, that's a welcome if I've ever seen one." As they approached the shore, Ava leaned so far over the side of the boat that Elena had to pull her back. "It's so big," Ava whispered. "Mom, this is ours." The word ours hit Elena harder than anything. They had never truly owned anything. Not a home, not security, not even time. The idea that something belonged to them felt foreign, almost impossible. But here it was, solid, real, and wrapped in a legacy she didn't yet understand. Jonah helped them onto the dock, his boots thudding heavily on the old planks. "Storm will come again soon," he warned. "Best get you settled before Astor tests your backbone." His words carried a mix of humor and truth. This wasn't paradise. It was a challenge, a wild, unpredictable, demanding place. And maybe that was exactly why Eleanor had chosen it. Some wounds don't heal in quiet suburbs or tidy apartments. Some need the wind, the ocean, the unfiltered honesty of nature. As they walked up the winding path toward the house Eleanor had left behind, Elena felt an odd sensation, like the island was listening. The trees swayed as if shifting closer, the air thick with pine and sea salt, and, somewhere in the distance, a raven cried out, its call echoing across the cliffs. Ava squeezed her hand. Mom, it feels alive. And in that moment, Elena believed her. The house at the top of the hill was not luxurious. Its paint was chipped. The porch sagged, and the windows were fogged with age. Yet something about it radiated warmth. Jonah unlocked the door with a key so old it looked hand-forged. Inside, the scent of cedar and ocean greeted them, along with shelves lined with journals, maps, and artifacts, evidence of a life spent studying something extraordinary. Eleanor's breath caught. She could feel Eleanor's presence everywhere, not haunting, but guiding. And for the first time in years, Eleanor didn't feel small or broken. She felt chosen. The lesson of this moment is subtle but powerful. Sometimes the places we're meant to heal don't look like rescue. They look like responsibility. They look like work. They look like a mountain rising from the sea, daring us to climb. Aster wasn't here to save Elena. It was here to challenge her into becoming someone stronger than the world had allowed her to be. As the sun dipped lower, Jonah prepared a small fire in the hearth. Raymond explained next steps. Ava explored with the wonder of a child who had finally found a place that didn't push her away. And Elena stood on the porch, wind whipping through her hair, staring at the lighthouse's silhouette against the dimming sky. She didn't know yet that the island carried secrets. Powerful, dangerous, beautiful secrets. She didn't know that others already suspected the truth and were preparing to take Aster for themselves. And she didn't know that the next revelation would shake her understanding of family, history, and destiny. But she did know one thing. As she looked across the waves toward the world she'd left behind, she whispered to herself, "We're not running anymore." The first night on Aster Island felt strangely peaceful. The crackle of the fireplace, the scent of sea salt drifting through the open window, and the soft hum of the wind against the shutters formed a kind of lullaby that Elena hadn't experienced in years. Ava fell asleep quickly on a sofa covered in knitted blankets that smelled faintly of lavender. But Elena stayed awake long after the flames died down, turning slowly through the quiet house with a mix of curiosity and unease. Something about Aster seemed unfinished, like a book left open, mid-sentence. Jonah noticed her restlessness. With a silent nod, he handed her a small brass key and pointed toward a narrow wooden door beneath the staircase. "She wanted you to find it when you were ready," he said before stepping back into the shadows. The key was warm in Elena's palm, as if dozens of hands had held it before, passing it like a torch from one generation to the next. The door creaked open to reveal a narrow stairwell leading to a cellar that smelled of old stone and cedar. A single bulb flickered to life when she pulled the chain. Shelves lined the walls, shelves filled not with tools or canned goods, but with journals, hundreds of them. Leather-bound, cloth-bound, some wrapped in twine, others marked with symbols that reminded Elena of constellations. The first one she reached for was embossed with initials she didn't recognize. "I am," and inside, written in flowing French cursive, was a name she had never heard but would soon never forget. Isabella Moreau. This wasn't Eleanor's handwriting. This wasn't from a few decades ago. These journals were over a century old. As Eleanor read, the world of Aster Island began to unravel itself in ways she hadn't anticipated. Isabella Moreau, a French-American cartographer and naturalist, had lived on Astor long before Eleanor ever set foot there. She arrived in 1898, fleeing political turmoil and seeking what she called a sanctuary of pure earth. Her journals documented more than daily life. They chronicled migrations of birds, geological formations, ocean temperatures, and strange luminous organisms visible only during winter tides. She wrote about Astor with a reverence that bordered on spiritual devotion, but there was something else in her words, something haunted. Repeating phrases like, "The island warns before it reveals," and "Some truths are meant to be guarded, not discovered." Elena had felt something similar upon arrival, the sensation of being watched, not by something sinister, but by a presence ancient and wise. Isabella had felt it too, but she had gone further. In one entry, the ink slightly smudged from old tears, Isabella wrote about a discovery on the North Cliffs, a cavern filled with crystalline structures that pulsed softly with light, synchronized with the tides as if breathing with the ocean. Elena gasped, because Jonah had hinted at something on the northern cliffs, something he had refused to describe fully. Ava, who had padded quietly downstairs, startled Elena when she whispered, "Mom, what is that?" Her eyes were wide, fixed on a faded sketch inside the journal, a drawing of strange symbols carved into stone. The same symbols Elena had seen faintly scratched onto the lighthouse door earlier that day. The room felt colder suddenly, the way it does when truth presses against the world from the edges. Raymond arrived later that morning, brushing snow from his coat, to deliver documents for Elena to sign. But when he saw the open journals scattered across the cellar table, he stopped speaking. "She found them," Jonah said flatly from behind him. Raymond swallowed hard. "Then it's time she knew." They explained that Eleanor Whitmore, Elena's great-aunt, had not been the island's first protector. She had inherited that role from Isabella Moreau. Every caretaker before her had added their own journals, documenting Astor's delicate ecosystems, strange mineral formations, and unexplained phenomena. The more Elena read, the clearer it became that Astor wasn't merely inherited land. It was a responsibility built on generations of quiet stewardship. Isabella had believed that Astor was one of the last untouched places capable of teaching humanity how to restore what had been broken elsewhere. She had warned that the minerals hidden deep within the island, rare, powerful, and coveted, could bring exploitation and destruction if ever revealed to the wrong hands. And Eleanor had spent her lifetime ensuring that never happened. There was a journal dated 1952 where Eleanor, then just a young woman, described seeing corporate surveyors trying to bribe local fishermen for access. Another entry from the 70s detailed attempts by private developers to purchase the island, disguised as scientific partners. And in one heartbreaking passage, Eleanor wrote of a sister who abandoned her, unable to bear the weight of secrecy, leaving Eleanor to protect Astor alone. Elena closed the journal slowly. The loneliness in those pages felt eerily familiar, like her own years of carrying burdens too heavy for one person. Here, hidden in these journals, was the truth. Astor wasn't just a gift. It was a mission passed down through generations, entrusted only to those the island seemed to choose. And somehow, despite her brokenness, despite her hardships, despite everything life had taken from her, Astor had chosen Elena. The lesson in that realization was profound. Sometimes life doesn't choose the strongest person or the most successful. Sometimes it chooses the one who knows what it means to lose everything and still keep going, the one who understands value beyond money, the one who can carry legacy with both humility and fire. As the afternoon light slanted into the cellar, illuminating the dust particles swirling in the air, Elena felt something within her shift. For the first time, she didn't feel like a visitor on the island. She felt like she belonged to its history, but Jonah's expression grew dark as he opened a newer journal, Eleanor's final one. The entries there were shorter, rushed, written with a hand that trembled. She knew her time was ending, he said, and she knew trouble was coming. The last page contained a message addressed directly to Elena. When you find this, you will be standing at the threshold of truth. But be careful. Others have learned the island's value, and they will come. What you do next will decide the fate of Aster forever. Elena froze. It wasn't just metaphorical. Eleanor meant it literally, and she was right. Because at that very moment, as dusk settled over Aster's frozen pines, a boat sliced silently through the water toward the island. Someone else was coming. The morning after Elena discovered Isabella Moreau's journals, the island felt different, brighter somehow, as if awakening to the fact that its new keeper had finally glimpsed its deeper truth. The sun pressed through shifting clouds, scattering gold across the treetops. Ava dashed outside with a burst of laughter, her breath forming white clouds in the cold air, while she chased a trail of seabirds gliding above the shoreline. For a brief, fragile moment, it felt like peace. The kind of peace that sinks slowly into your skin, whispering that maybe life doesn't have to hurt forever. But peace never lasts long when something valuable is at stake. It began with a low mechanical hum that didn't belong to nature. Jonah heard it first, his entire posture stiffening as he stepped onto the porch and looked toward the water. Elena followed him, squinting into the morning glare. A sleek black vessel was slicing across the waves, too polished to be a fishing boat, too fast to be a tour craft. As it neared the dock, its engines throttled back, revealing the chrome insignia on its hull. Helix Terra Resources. If Isabella's journals were the soul of the island, then Helix was its shadow. 3 people disembarked. At the front was a sharply dressed man in a tailored charcoal coat, flanked by 2 similarly dressed assistants who carried steel cases the way security guards carry weapons. The man smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes, a corporate smile, rehearsed and hollow. "Miss Carter," he called out warmly, as if greeting an old friend rather than a woman he had never met. "My name is Adrian Kessler. I represent Helix. Congratulations on your fortunate inheritance." Jonah muttered something under his breath in Quinault, a language Elena didn't understand, but whose tone made the message clear. Trouble has arrived. Adrian extended his hand, which Elena did not take. The refusal didn't faze him. "We'd like to have a conversation," he continued. "Your great-aunt had been in negotiations with us before her passing. Unfinished business, you might say." Jonah bristled. "Negotiations?" he scoffed. "Your people tried to bully her for years. She refused every time." Adrian's smile didn't flinch. "We prefer the term partnership." Eleanor was a woman of vision. She understood the global importance of what lies beneath this island. He snapped his fingers, and his assistant opened one of the cases, revealing a glowing holographic projection of geological maps, mineral scans, and seismic charts. Words like rare earth concentrations, energy potential, and geostrategic value flashed before Elena's eyes. Jonah slammed the case shut. "You have no right to those scans. They were taken without permission." Adrian barely blinked. "We're simply trying to help Miss Carter understand the magnitude of her situation. Astor Island isn't just pretty scenery. It contains one of the richest deposits of a rare mineral used in satellites, renewable energy storage, and advanced medical imaging." He leaned in slightly. "We're talking about a resource worth billions." The number didn't shock Elena as much as she'd expected. Maybe she'd already sensed that Astor carried something extraordinary, something powerful enough to draw both protectors and predators. Adrian continued smoothly. "We're prepared to offer you $42 million for mining rights alone. No disruption to the island's surface habitat. We have cutting-edge extraction technology." Jonah barked a laugh. "There's no such thing as disruption-free mining." Adrian ignored him entirely. "This money would change your life, Miss Carter. You could ensure a future for your daughter, a home, education, stability." His tone softened, just a touch. "I know what you've been through." The worst part was how much Elena wanted to believe him. She pictured warmth instead of cold motel rooms, a real kitchen, a real bed, a place where Ava wouldn't have to lie about being okay. $42 million could erase every bruise life had ever left on her. She could rebuild from scratch, stone by stone, without fear or hunger or shame. But something inside her recoiled. Maybe it was Isabella's warning echoing in the back of her mind. Maybe it was Eleanor's trembling handwriting on those final pages. Or maybe it was the way Adrian's voice carried the same cadence as every person who had ever tried to exploit her vulnerability. Ava ran up the hill just then, waving a piece of driftwood shaped like a heart. "Mom, look what I found." She froze when she saw the strangers and instinctively stepped closer to Elena. Adrian shifted his gaze toward Ava. "You're a lucky girl," he said. "Your mother could give you a life beyond anything you've imagined." Elena's stomach twisted. Something about the way he spoke to Ava, like she was leverage, set fire to every protective instinct inside her. Raymond Hale arrived moments later, trekking quickly up the path with papers tucked beneath his arm. His voice was calm but firm. "Your presence here is unauthorized. You're trespassing on private property. I suggest you leave before we escalate this legally." Adrian raised his hands in mock surrender. "We're just here to start a conversation." "And now it's over," Raymond said. But Adrian wasn't finished. "Miss Carter," he added, lowering his voice, "if you turn us away, others will come. Investors, government agencies, international interests. You won't be able to stop the tide." Jonah stepped between them. "She won't be alone." Adrian smirked. "No, because Eleanor certainly was." The words hit like a slap. Elena felt them slice through the quiet confidence she had begun to grow. She didn't know what Eleanor had sacrificed. Not yet. But Helix clearly did. Adrian's final words were a warning disguised as kindness. "Your aunt kept secrets, Miss Carter. Dangerous ones. If you're not careful, those secrets will swallow you whole." Then he turned, gestured for his assistants, and boarded the sleek boat. The engine roared, churning dark water into foam as they sped away, leaving behind the sharp scent of fuel and a silence heavy with threat. For a long moment, Elena couldn't move. Ava clung to her sleeve, and Jonah stared after the boat with a grimness that made her chest tighten. Raymond placed a hand on her shoulder. "They're not done. They'll try again." And Elena knew he was right. Astor had something the world wanted, and the world was not accustomed to being told no. The lesson buried in that morning was one Elena had run from all her life. When you finally gain something precious, you must learn how to protect it. Not everyone who offers a hand is there to help. Some come with silk words and steel intentions, and the higher the value, the deeper the danger. As afternoon clouds rolled in, casting long shadows over the island, Elena felt that peace she'd experienced earlier slipping away. The journals, the lighthouse, the strange pulse Eleanor had hinted at, all of it suddenly felt fragile, exposed. But this time, she wasn't going to run. She closed the cellar door that evening with Isabella's oldest journal pressed to her chest. She understood now. The island didn't need a wealthy guardian. It needed a resilient one, someone who knew how to stand in the storm and hold her ground. And in the days ahead, Astor Island would reveal a secret larger than any mineral deposit, one that Helix and the world beyond had misinterpreted completely. For 2 days after the encounter with Helix, Elena could feel the island shifting around her, not physically, but in intangible, uncanny ways. The wind seemed sharper, the forest felt watchful. Even the ocean carried a different tone, as if its waves were whispering warnings to whoever knew how to listen. Jonah stayed close, his movements more deliberate, his eyes drifting often toward the northern cliffs, the place Isabella Moreau had written about so obsessively, the place Eleanor had referenced with a trembling hand in her final journal. It was there, Jonah explained, where the island kept its oldest mystery, and it was there Eleanor had instructed him to take Elena when the moment of truth finally arrived. That moment came on a night when the moon vanished behind thick clouds and the air grew still enough to hear the crack of ice forming on the shoreline. Jonah appeared at the doorway, lantern in hand, bundled in a heavy coat. "If you want to understand what Helix thinks they're after," he said, "you need to see what's really here." He looked at Ava and added, "She comes too. The island already knows her." Elena hesitated, every protective instinct screaming, but something in Jonah's eyes told her this wasn't danger. It was revelation. They set out under a sky the color of burnt charcoal, guided only by the lantern's trembling glow. The forest closed in around them, tall pines creaking softly as if shifting to make room. The snow beneath their boots was fresh, barely touched. Jonah explained that most of the island's visitors, surveyors, scouts, opportunists, had tried and failed to reach the northern cliffs. It wasn't the terrain that stopped them. It was the island itself. Every time someone came with exploitation in mind, storms conveniently rolled in, equipment malfunctioned, boats stalled. "Astor protects itself," he said, "but for those who come in respect, it opens." They hiked for nearly an hour until the trees thinned and the sound of crashing waves grew louder. The cliffs rose like jagged teeth against the darkness, their edges glowing faintly with reflected starlight. Jonah guided them along a narrow path carved into the rock, every step demanding trust. Ava clung to Elena's hand, but instead of fear, her face was filled with awe. "It feels warm," she whispered, and strangely, it did, like the air itself had a pulse. They reached a cavern at the base of the cliffs, partially hidden behind an outcropping of rock. The entrance looked unremarkable, but inside, the passage sloped deep into the earth. Water dripped from the ceiling, echoing through the darkness in a slow, rhythmic cadence. It was cold, so cold, Elena could see her breath shimmer. Yet beneath that coldness was a kind of hum, like the faint vibration of something waiting. Jonah raised his lantern and murmured, "Look." The cave opened into a chamber that took Elena's breath away. Pools of water lined the cavern, floor, some shallow, some deep, each one glowing with an other-worldly blue light, not bright, not harsh, but soft and alive. The water shimmered as if holding stars within it, and when the waves outside struck the cliff, the pools pulsed in harmony, like a heartbeat. Ava gasped, her voice echoing off the stone. "It's magic!" Jonah knelt beside one pool. Isabella called it the pulse. Scientists would call it bioluminescence, but that's not all this is. Elena crouched beside him, mesmerized. The light was unlike the glowing algae she'd seen in nature documentaries. This light changed color, blue to violet, violet to green, green to gold, each shift syncing perfectly with the rhythm of the tides. Jonah picked up a smooth stone and dropped it gently into the water. The pool rippled outward in glowing rings that spiraled like a galaxy. Isabella spent decades studying this phenomenon. The organisms react to pressure changes, weather shifts, ocean currents, sometimes even seismic patterns. She believed the pulse could predict storms far before modern instruments. Eleanor realized suddenly this was what Helix wanted, not minerals, not treasure. A natural system more advanced than any man-made technology. A biological early warning network hidden beneath the island for centuries, preserved only because it had been protected. And it wasn't just beautiful, it was alive. Ava dipped her fingers into the water, and the pool brightened beneath her touch, swirling around her hand in gold spirals. Elena panicked and pulled her back, but Jonah shook his head. "It responds to intention," he said quietly. "Some who touch it see nothing. Others awaken it." A soft wind blew through the cavern, though there were no visible openings. The light intensified, dancing up the walls, illuminating carvings, ancient markings etched deeply into the stone, spirals, constellations, wave patterns, and a symbol Eleanor recognized from Isabella's journals. It wasn't random. It was a language, a story, a map. The pulse wasn't just a natural wonder. It was a living archive. Ava stepped closer, reaching toward a glowing cluster of organisms drifting near the pool's edge. "It feels like it's talking," she said softly. Elena felt tears gather, not from fear, but from a strange, overwhelming sense of connection. Aster wasn't a burden. It was a gift that had been cared for by generations of guardians. And now, somehow, miraculously, she and Ava had been chosen to continue that line. Jonah pointed to a deep fissure in the rock. Eleanor wrote that the pulse brightens during major shifts, storms, earthquakes, even human conflict. She believed the island feels imbalance before humans do, and it reacts. Elena touched the rock beside her. It was warm. Jonah continued, "Helix thinks they can extract these organisms, replicate them, sell the technology, but once removed from Aster's ecosystem, they die. What they want isn't just impossible, it's deadly to the island and to everything Eleanor protected. Silence wrapped around them, thick, sacred, ancient. And in that silence, Elena felt something she hadn't felt since she was a child. Wonder. Pure, unfiltered wonder. Not fear, Not desperation, not survival, wonder. The lesson inside that moment was profound. The world often teaches us that value comes from what we can extract, what we can take, sell, or own. But here, deep beneath the cliffs of Aster, Elena learned a different truth. Some treasures are not meant to be harvested. Some are meant to be safeguarded, witnessed, and honored. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is protect something simply because it deserves to exist. As they left the cavern, the light dimmed behind them, returning to its steady heartbeat. Elena held Ava close as they navigated the cliff path. Snow had begun to fall again, slow at first, then heavier. The sky rumbled with distant thunder, though the storm was far offshore. Jonah glanced at the sky with an expression Elena had never seen before. Fear. The pulse never glows that bright without reason, he murmured. Something's coming. On the horizon, barely visible through the darkening clouds, a shadow moved across the water. Not a storm, not a wave. A boat moving fast. The island had warned them. The storm arrived at Aster Island with a violence that felt almost purposeful. Howling winds tearing at the shutters, waves slamming into the rocks with the force of 1,000 fists. Elena barely had time to process what the pulse had warned them about before nature itself rose up like a guardian, preparing for battle. She and Ava huddled inside the old house, while Jonah secured the windows and Raymond studied maps spread across the kitchen table, trying to predict which path the storm would carve across the coastline. But the storm outside wasn't the only one gathering strength. Something quieter, more personal, had been simmering for days, and it chose this moment to break open. It began with Lucas. He had been distant ever since they returned from the cavern, quiet, tense, pacing the upstairs hall like someone wrestling with a decision he wasn't ready to voice. Elena had assumed he was processing everything they'd seen, everything they'd learned. But late that evening, after Ava had finally drifted to sleep, Lucas appeared in the doorway of the living room with an expression she hadn't seen on him in years, fear braided with anger. "Mom," he said, voice sharper than she expected, "we have to leave this island, tonight." Elena blinked, unsure she heard him right. "Leave? Lucas, there's a storm." "I don't care about the storm," he snapped. "We shouldn't be here. This island, it's not normal. You saw that thing in the cave. You saw how Jonah acts like the trees can hear us. This place is dangerous." She tried to soften her voice. "Lucas, nothing here wants to hurt us. The island isn't... It's not just the island," he cut in. "Someone contacted me." The room fell silent. He pulled out his phone. The same phone Elena thought had been dead for days. But it wasn't dead. It had been receiving messages, and those messages were from a man claiming to be a relative. Marcus Whitmore, Eleanor's estranged nephew. The name hit Elena like a blow. She remembered it from the journals, shaded, angry entries about a boy who couldn't accept being left out of the inheritance, who believed Eleanor owed him the island simply because of blood. "He says the inheritance wasn't legal," Lucas continued. "He says you're in danger. He says the people here are manipulating you." Elena's heart tightened. "You're talking to strangers about Aster?" "He's not a stranger," Lucas insisted. "He's family, and he says he can help us leave before it gets worse." Before Elena could respond, the power flickered. A gust of wind slammed into the house with a booming crack. Ava whimpered upstairs. Jonah rushed into the room. the lantern shaking in his hand. "A boat was spotted before the storm hit," he said. 2 miles offshore. They were moving fast. Then the radar blinked out. Raymond set down his papers, tense. "It's Helix. They're using the chaos to get onto the island." The house groaned as thunder shook the sky. Lucas flinched. "See? This is exactly why we have to go. Mom, we never should have come here." Elena moved toward him, reaching for his arm. "I know you're scared, but we need to stay together. We need—" "You're not listening," he shouted, pulling away. "You never listen. You drag us from place to place, motel to motel, shelter to shelter. And now you've dragged us into some creepy science experiment on a dead woman's island." The words sliced deeper than any storm wind. Elena felt her breath shake. She knew Lucas wasn't cruel. He was hurting. But that didn't make the blow any softer. Jonah stepped between them gently, sensing the pain in the room. "The island didn't choose wrong," he said quietly. "It knows who can bear its truth." Lucas turned on him. "Stop talking like that, like the island thinks or feels. It's creepy, and all of you sound insane." Another shock of thunder rattled the window panes. Elena tried to take a breath, tried to steady the rising panic in her chest. "Lucas," she began, "I'm doing the best I can." "Well, your best isn't good enough," he whispered. "It never has been." His voice cracked with the weight of all the years he'd spent pretending to be strong while watching his mother break herself, trying to keep them alive. Elena saw it then, the exhaustion in his eyes, the guilt, the grief. He wasn't just scared of the island. He was scared that he couldn't save her if she fell apart again. Before either of them could speak, the front door shuddered violently, once, then again, louder each time. Ava screamed upstairs. Jonah ran toward the door, ready to bar it if necessary. Raymond grabbed a heavy flashlight, as if it were a weapon. The storm outside roared, but the knocking grew clearer, more deliberate, more human. Someone was out there. "Mom!" Ava cried again from the stairs. Elena rushed to her, pulling her into her arms. Lucas hovered behind them, torn between fear and defiance. Jonah called out from the door. Helix wouldn't knock. Then he threw it open. Standing on the porch, drenched and shivering, was a man in his 40s with Eleanor's sharp cheekbones and dark eyes. The eyes Elena had seen in faded photographs in the journals. "Miss Carter," he said through chattering teeth. "My name is Marcus Whitmore. We need to talk before this storm kills us all." For a moment, no one moved. Rain pounded the porch. The storm screamed like a living thing. And in that paralysis, Elena understood something with chilling clarity. The enemy wasn't only coming from the outside. Sometimes the greatest fractures begin within the family itself. The lesson was painful but undeniable. Crisis doesn't build character. Crisis reveals it. It shows the cracks we've been hiding, the fears we've buried, and the truths we've been too afraid to name. And once revealed, those fractures must be faced, or they will break everything. Elena stepped back, torn, shaken, unsure whom to trust. Behind Marcus, the storm raged. Inside the house, her son trembled with betrayal. And deep beneath the cliffs, the pulse of Astor glowed brighter, sensing conflict, sensing danger, sensing the arrival of the next turning point. The storm finally eased by dawn, leaving Astor Island wrapped in a strange silver stillness, like the whole world had exhaled after holding its breath too long. Rainwater dripped from the pine needles in slow rhythmic beats, mixing with the soft hum of the ocean rising and falling against the bruised shoreline. Inside the house, the air felt heavy, charged with tension from the night before. Marcus Whitmore slept uneasily by the hearth. Jonah kept watch by the window, and Lucas sat at the kitchen table staring at his hands as though trying to find the version of himself he had lost somewhere in the chaos. Helena barely slept at all. Some truths refused to wait, even when the world outside is breaking open. She waited until the storm clouds thinned before reaching for Eleanor's final journal, the one she hadn't dared open completely since the night she found it. The leather was cracked, the pages thin as moth wings, and the handwriting looked different from the others, weaker, rushed, as if Eleanor had written with the urgency of someone racing against time. Jonah joined her quietly. Marcus pretended not to listen, but every muscle in his face betrayed that he was hanging on every word. The first entry was dated months before Eleanor died. It described sleepless nights, strange movements along the cliffs, unmarked boats circling the island, and corporate letters disguised as research inquiries. She had known Helix was coming. She had known Astor had run out of time. But deeper into the journal, the entries shifted from fear to clarity. Eleanor wrote about Isabella Moreau not as a distant historical figure, but as a kind of guide, someone whose work had laid the foundation for understanding Astor's purpose in the wider world. And then, there it was, the sealed envelope. Jonah slid it toward Elena. The wax was imprinted with Isabella's symbol, the same spiral Ava had traced in the cavern. Elena's fingers trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was a letter written not by Eleanor, but by Isabella herself, written decades before Elena was even born. To the one the island chooses next, I do not know your name, but I know your heart. You will not arrive here in strength. You will arrive in fracture. But the island knows that broken things are often the ones willing to protect what cannot protect itself. Do not let the world take what was never meant to be possessed. Elena's breath caught. Jonah nodded, as if he'd read the words 1,000 times. Marcus, however, scoffed under his breath. You can't be serious. You're going to let a dead woman's poetry dictate the fate of a place worth billions? Jonah turned, the calm in his eyes shifting into something sharper. Isabella wasn't just a poet. She was a scientist, ahead of her time. Her notes predicted tidal patterns decades before modern oceanography. Her journals contained the earliest documentation of bioluminescent organisms in this region. Organisms we know now respond to environmental stress long before hurricanes form offshore. Marcus snorted. It's a cave that glows. You're making it mystical. No, Elena said slowly, pressing her hand over the letter. It's a warning. She opened the second page. Inside were charts, hand-drawn, intricate, mapping the pulse's reaction to storms, migrations, ocean temperatures. Isabella had recorded episodes of the pulse brightening in sync with earthquakes across the Pacific Rim, volcanic rumblings in Alaska, and even human conflict that left the coastline trembling with ship traffic. She had understood something extraordinary. Astor was a sensor, nature's instrument, an ancient living seismograph. Raymond arrived moments later with documents of his own, environmental reports, protection clauses hidden deep in Eleanor's estate files, correspondences with environmental organizations who believed Astor was one of the last intact ecosystems of its kind. She was building a case, Raymond said, a scientific, legal, and moral foundation to designate Astor as a protected sanctuary. but she died before finishing it. Isabella's final note explained why. If the island falls into the wrong hands, it will be stripped for profit, and the pulse will die. Once gone, this knowledge will never return. The world will lose a voice it desperately needs. Elena closed the notebook, her mind racing. Suddenly, everything made sense. The secrecy, the warnings, the weight behind Eleanor's trembling handwriting. Aster was not a commodity. Aster was a teacher, a warning system, a living archive of Earth's memory, and Isabella and Eleanor had dedicated their lives to preserving it. But the most shocking revelation was still inside the envelope. A folded blueprint, meticulous, hand-drawn, mapped out the design for the Aster Stewardship Trust, a self-sustaining foundation governed jointly by scientists, environmental stewards, and the island's caretaker. A trust that would ensure Aster could never be bought, sold, or exploited. Eleanor had spent her life refining the blueprint, adding legal protections, philanthropic partnerships, and ecological research plans. She had built the future. She just never got to activate it. Elena felt something shift inside her, something deep and steady. For the first time, she understood exactly why she had been chosen. Not in a mystical sense, but in the practical, soul-level way that certain people understand responsibility because they've spent their lives surviving without help. She had lived through abandonment, poverty, shame, and loss. And someone who has lost everything learns quickly what is worth protecting. Marcus stood abruptly. So what? You think you're the heir because some island chose you? Because a dead heiress wrote you a riddle? You don't deserve this place. You barely survived your own life. Elena met his gaze, steady and unflinching. Exactly. And that's why I won't sell it. Marcus expected her to crumble. Instead, he saw a woman who had finally found the ground beneath her feet. She continued softly, "This isn't about who deserves the island. It's about who will protect it. Not for profit, not for legacy, but because it's the right thing to do." The room fell silent. Jonah bowed his head in quiet agreement. Raymond exhaled as if a battle had just ended. And even Ava, who had wandered into the room rubbing sleep from her eyes, seemed to sense the shift in the air. The lesson of this moment was clear. Real inheritance isn't what we receive. It's what we're strong enough to preserve. And sometimes, the heaviest legacies are given to the people who know how it feels to lose. As the storm clouds parted and the morning sun spread gold across the floorboards, Elena folded Isabella's letter and placed it gently against her heart. She didn't know what battles were coming next. She didn't know how to build a trust or protect an island from a corporation with endless resources. But she knew who she was now. She was not a visitor. She was not a survivor. She was the next guardian of Aster. Morning on Aster Island arrived with a gentleness that felt almost unreal after the storm's brutality. The clouds thinned like pulled wool, and shafts of pale gold light slanted through the drenched pines. The ocean breathed steadily again, rolling in smooth, calm waves that erased every trace of the chaos from the night before. But inside the house, a different kind of storm was gathering, one made not of wind or thunder, but of choices. Choices that would shape not just Elena's future, but the fate of the island itself. She sat at the old wooden table, Isabella's blueprint for the Aster Stewardship Trust spread before her like a map leading toward a life she wasn't sure she was brave enough to claim. Jonah brewed tea with trembling hands. Raymond was reading through Eleanor's legal notes with the intensity of someone decoding a language long forgotten, and Marcus paced near the door like a caged animal. Ava sat curled by the fire, drawing spirals in her notebook, the same symbol carved into the cavern walls. There was no running from what needed to happen. Not anymore. Raymond cleared his throat. If we move forward with the trust, this won't be simple. Creating a foundation like this requires structure, governance, partners, long-term funding. And Helix won't go quietly. They'll sue, appeal, apply federal pressure. They'll drag you into courtrooms, onto the news, into battles meant to exhaust you until you give up. Jonah added, Eleanor fought them her whole life. She didn't finish the job, but she built the path. Marcus scoffed. This is insane. You're talking about turning a private island into some kind of eco-sanctuary nonprofit? You can't fight a corporation that has more lawyers than employees. Elena kept her eyes on the blueprint. Isabella's handwriting danced across the page, delicate, looping, but unwavering. It held the weight of a century. She traced the outline of the proposed structures: a small research center, a tide observatory, an educational lodge for students, a protected perimeter of forest and shoreline. Isabella had envisioned a place where knowledge was shared freely, where the pulse could be studied ethically, where nature's warnings could be translated into action. A place that belonged not to one family, but to the future. Elena looked up, her voice steady. We're not fighting Helix alone. Raymond frowned. What do you mean? Elena pushed back her chair and stood. For the first time, she didn't feel like someone waiting for life to hurt her. She felt like someone stepping into something bigger than fear. This island has been studied quietly for decades. Isabella had connections, academics, oceanographers, and Eleanor expanded that network. They left contacts, notes, letters, people who believed Astor mattered. Jonah nodded slowly. The Kinal Council will help. Isabella worked with them. Eleanor did too. They won't let Helix destroy sacred land. Raymond's eyes lit with sudden understanding. The tribes, the conservation groups, the universities, no AA. These aren't just contacts, they're potential trustees. Elena felt her heartbeat quicken, not with panic this time, but with purpose. Astor isn't meant to be protected by one person. It's meant to be protected by many. But Marcus slammed his hand on the doorframe. And what about your family? You think dragging us into some lifetime war with a megacorp is noble? You have a daughter, you have a son who's terrified, and you want to bind your life to a pile of rocks and glowing water? Lucas flinched at the mention, guilt flickering across his face. Elena walked toward Marcus, not with anger, but with a quiet strength that made him step back. This island isn't a burden, she said softly. It's a chance to stop being powerless. The words sank into the room like stone. Even Lucas seemed stunned by the conviction in her voice. But she wasn't finished. For years, all I did was survive. Running from job to job, motel to shelter, never able to protect anything. Not a home, not stability, not even my own hope. I held my kids together with nothing but stubbornness. And now, for the first time in my life, I have something I can fight for, not just against. Lucas swallowed hard, his voice small. Mom, what if you get hurt? Elena smiled at him, tired but warm. Then I'll get back up, and I won't be alone. She reached for his hand, and to her relief, He didn't pull away. "You don't have to be brave right now. That's my job." Ava joined them, wrapping her arms around both. "We can help protect it too," she whispered. "We're part of the island now." Marcus looked away, jaw clenched, but there was fear in his eyes. Not the fear of losing land, but the fear of being left out of something meaningful. Helena softened her voice. "Marcus, you can stay, or you can leave. But Aster isn't a prize to win. It's a responsibility. If you want to be part of protecting it, there's a place for you. If not, I'll still keep the promise." Eleanor couldn't finish. The offer broke something in him. Not anger, but pride. He sank into a chair, head in his hands. For the first time, Marcus looked less like an intruder and more like a man who had spent his whole life believing he wasn't chosen for anything worthy. Raymond laid out the next steps, the trust papers, the governing board, the legal shield, the partnerships with scientists and tribal councils, the grant applications, the conservation easements, the public declarations that would make Aster untouchable in the eyes of the law. It was overwhelming. It was enormous. It was a battle years in the making, and yet it finally felt like the right fight. By sunset, after hours of planning, arguing, dreaming, and deciding, Elena signed the first page of the Aster Stewardship Trust. Her signature wasn't elegant. It wavered slightly, the ink bleeding into the fibers of the paper, but it was strong enough. She looked out the window at the lighthouse, perched on the cliff. Its light flickered on for the first time since she arrived, casting a wide, sweeping beam across the darkening waves. Jonah whispered, "It knows." The lesson of the day was clear. True strength isn't inherited, it's chosen. And sometimes the bravest choice is the one that protects something larger than yourself, even when the cost is uncertain. As night fell, Aster Island felt different, steadier, safer, almost grateful. The foundation had been born. The island had its guardians. And Elena, after a lifetime of running, had finally stopped. 20 years passed on Aster Island, the way seasons move across an old, wise forest, slowly at first, then all at once. The lighthouse no longer felt like a forgotten relic, but a beating heart, its beam sweeping across the water every night, guiding ships away from danger and guiding people towards something far more profound. The Aster Stewardship Trust had grown from a fragile idea scribbled in Isabella Moreau's journals into a thriving sanctuary known around the world for its quiet brilliance. Scientists, researchers, tribal leaders, artists, and students arrived year-round to study the pulse, the tides, the storms, and the delicate ecosystems that had survived only because one family chose stewardship over profit. And at the center of it all, older now, softer at the edges but stronger in spirit, was Elena Carter. Her hair had silvered, and the lines on her face told stories of battles fought and victories earned. But her eyes held the same light they'd found on that first night on the island, the light of someone who no longer existed to endure life, but to shape it. Each morning she walked down the wooden steps to the water, letting the cold wind kiss her cheeks while she watched the pulse shimmer beneath the cliffs. The world had changed because of what Aster revealed. Thanks to collaborative research, coastal towns now relied on the Pulse Index to anticipate storms days earlier than satellite models. Environmental agencies across the Pacific Northwest studied Aster as a masterclass in conservation, blending indigenous knowledge with modern science. The island's guardianship model had been replicated in 6 different countries, but her greatest legacy was her children. Ava, no longer the small girl chasing seabirds, had become a marine biologist with a voice that commanded rooms. She published groundbreaking work on bioluminescent ecosystems and their relationship to environmental stress patterns. Schools across America taught excerpts from her papers, and every summer she returned to Astor, leading groups of students into the cavern with lanterns, just as Jonah once led her. She always paused at the entrance, placing her hand on the stone wall, whispering, "I'm home," before the cavern answered with its faint golden glow. Lucas, who once begged to leave the island, had stayed after all. He found healing in the raw honesty of the land. Something about Astor's stillness soothed a part of him he never knew how to mend. Over the years, he became the island's unofficial protector, working alongside Jonah until he eventually stepped into the role himself. He knew the forests better than anyone, could read the ocean like a language, and spent long nights repairing the lighthouse gear with a quiet devotion that mirrored the transformation in his own heart. His anger had softened into purpose. His fear had turned into guardianship. Even Marcus found his place. He never fully embraced the mystique of the island, never completely understood the pulse or the carvings in the cave, but he respected Elena's vision. He helped build the financial framework of the trust and became a liaison between Astor and conservation groups across the state. In a way, he became the bridge between 2 worlds, the corporate one he once trusted blindly and the sanctuary he once thought worthless. Jonah had passed a few years earlier, leaving behind a legacy woven into every trail, every policy, every story the island carried. His ashes rested beneath a cedar overlooking the water. A simple wooden marker read, "He kept watch." Elena visited often, always leaving a stone on the marker, an old tradition Jonah taught her, because she knew guardianship didn't end with life. But the proudest legacy of all was what Astor became to the world. The Astor Foundation had become internationally recognized for its unique model, half scientific research center, half cultural heritage site, half ecological sanctuary. Astor hosted artists' residencies, environmental fellowships, indigenous leadership retreats, and youth programs that pulled kids out of crowded cities and into the humbling quiet of nature. And every visitor left with the same feeling, that Astor was not a place to consume, but a place to learn from. The day the island received global protection status, Elena stood beside the lighthouse with Ava and Lucas. The sky glowed orange and the sea shimmered like molten glass. Reporters gathered, yet Elena didn't speak for the cameras. She spoke for the island. She said, "We learned here that the greatest wealth isn't something you take, but something you return. And the greatest legacy isn't being remembered. It's leaving something worth remembering." The pulse answered that night, glowing brighter than it had in months, lighting the cavern walls in gold and blue, as if celebrating the culmination of all the stories it had witnessed. It pulsed not with warning, but with peace. Later that evening, Elena returned alone to the lighthouse, carrying a leather-bound journal she'd kept for 20 years. Its pages held memories of storms weathered, discoveries made, and the slow transformation of her own heart. She sat by the window, listening to the waves roll against the rocks, and wrote one final entry. "We arrived here with nothing but fear. We leave here with purpose, not because the island saved us, but because it taught us how to save ourselves. And now, whoever comes after us will know that even the most fractured life can become a foundation for hope. She closed the journal, placing it on the shelf beside Isabella's, Eleanor's, and Jonah's. 4 generations of guardianship, all different, all necessary, the cycle complete, the legacy intact. Outside, the lighthouse turned its slow, steady arc across the water. Elena stepped onto the porch, breathing in the cool night air one last time for the day. The stars shimmered overhead, reflected in the dark. Ocean and the wind carried the faintest whisper through the trees, like a thank you. The story of Astor Island did not end with Elena. It lived in every researcher who walked its shores, every student who touched the glowing pools, every storm it warned the world about, and every heartbeat of the pulse beneath the cliffs. And somewhere in that vast quiet, the island kept doing what it had always done, protecting, teaching, and waiting for the next person brave enough to answer its call. Thank you for joining this journey. If this story moved you, share your thoughts, share this video, and subscribe so you never miss the next story waiting just beyond the horizon. If this journey touched you, share your thoughts below. Tell us, would you choose profit or protection? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories waiting just beyond the horizon.